Ground News is combating divisiveness in media. Ground is a news comparison platform that helps you see multiple perspectives for any news story so you can be more of a well-rounded news reader. Download the free app at ground.news/Pacman. Welcome to the show. We're going to be doing a variety of different vaccine-related discussions today. Some of them are very depressing, like this first one. Some of them have me sort of cautiously optimistic, even if it's for sort of weird or cynical reasons, but we'll get to that in a moment. I want to start with a new poll that contextualizes the why of so many people not getting the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, any of the COVID-19 vaccines that are available. And we've been talking about these really pathetic low numbers where we have endless millions of vaccines available, and we're struggling to even vaccinate 500,000 people per day in terms of one dose. Remember, it being mostly two-dose vaccines, that's probably only about 280 or 300,000 additional fully vaccinated people per day. We know that it's Republicans who are overwhelmingly the anti-vaccine individuals. And we've sort of seen some polling generally talk about, if the vaccine were to be fully approved by the FDA, 1/3 of the current anti-vaxxers would go and get vaccines. And then we say, well, is that true, or is that just the excuse they're coming up with now? And when the vaccines are fully approved, rather than just for emergency use, they'll come up with some other reason, or they just won't come up with any reason and they'll just never go. We have a disturbing new poll, which finds that 20% of Americans believe the government is injecting microchips into their bodies, hit the body with a microchip in the vaccines. And this is shocking. Half of Americans believe it is possible. Okay, listen to this. Where is the start of this polling information? An Economist YouGov poll released last week did not attempt to link false beliefs to social media use, but it did find wide confidence in a popular conspiracy theory among 1 in 5 Americans. The Economist /YouGov asked 1,500 Americans to respond to a set of statements, including the U.S. government is using the vaccine to microchip the population. 5% of all respondents, 1 in 20, this is a representative sample, 1 in 20 said it is definitely true that the U.S. is microchipping people with a COVID-19 vaccine. 15% said it's probably true. So you've got 20% of the country who believes it is either definitely or probably true that people are getting microchipped by the government for some kind of subsequent tracking, presumably, by the COVID vaccine. And then, look at this, fewer than half of respondents, just 46%, said it was definitely false. So between the 20% who think it's definitely or probably true and those who think it's definitely false, you've got an additional huge portion of the population that thinks, it's unlikely but possible or plausible that people are being microchipped by these vaccines. As the article points out, the debunked theory has circulated widely in the last year. Proponents suggest implanted chips will be used at some future date to subjugate humanity. Reuters reported in 2020, one video in support was viewed 27,000 times. Well, that's not that much, but it's still disturbing. The belief in the microchip conspiracy was most commonly held by lower income voters, white non-college educated Americans. That white non-college educated group continues to be a very problematic group, and Hispanic respondents. And I've spoken about that before as well, as an immigrant from South America myself, who's very in touch with a variety of these communities in the U.S. That when I was doing the Spanish show in the lead up to the election on the Hysteria network, the amount of anti-vaccine conspiracy type stuff I was getting in Spanish was disturbing. I told some stories about interactions a couple weeks ago in Miami with some Cuban Americans who believed the vaccine magnetized my mom. I told that story on the bonus show and others. So nothing there is particularly surprising. Now, the one thing I continue to bring up about this microchip conspiracy is, other than, when the first question that, I don't know what the first question is. One question we would ask would be, does the technology exist to inject such a microchip into people through a vaccine, through a syringe that is the size of the COVID vaccine syringe? the medical research I've looked at says it's not even possible. We're not aware, at least, of that technology. Now, a good conspiracy theorist would say, well, David, come on. They're keeping it secret that they have such little microchips, and that becomes indefeasible, and it's endless cynicism. But the bigger question for me is, why would you need to do this to track people when almost everybody is carrying something around that provides a wealth of information about us, including our location, meaning our mobile phones? In addition to that, most people's credit cards, debit cards now also have chips on them, which if you wanted to have it do the dual role of also tracking people, you could do it that way. Why would the government need to microchip people via an optional vaccine when everybody's already carrying around a phone and most people are carrying around a debit or a credit card? So it doesn't even pass the sniff test. But this is really, it has spread like a mind virus. Now, just one other thing. 2 out of 5, a couple. So just a few other notes from this poll. 17% of respondents thought that it was definitely or probably true that vaccines have been shown to cause autism. 17% instead of 20 who believed the microchip thing, also completely debunked. And then lastly, 2 out of 5 Americans said the statement, millions of illegal votes were cast in the 2020 general election, and the threat of the virus was exaggerated for political reasons, were probably or definitely true. That's 40%. More than half of respondents who identified as Trumpists believed that there was truth to those statements. So this is really, really bad. It doesn't seem to be getting dramatically better, but there is one little bit of news about which we can maybe be optimistic when it comes to vaccines, and I want to talk about that next. I don't yet know the reasons why this is happening, but yesterday morning, Fox News daytime, so not like the Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity stuff, the daytime stuff that they claim is news, seems to have been noticeably more pro-vaccine. Now, we're ultimately going to come back to the reality about Fox coverage about vaccines for months now, which is much like with the election was stolen conspiracy theories. They, while maybe not outright promoting anti-vaccine sentiment, were causing anti-vaccine sentiment under the guise of talking about freedom and by hosting all sorts of so-called vaccine skeptics and anti-vax people. So they've sort of made the bed that they are now sleeping in. But yesterday, I started seeing a number of more less overtly hostile to the vaccines videos. Could the explanation be the rubber is meeting the road and Fox News is actually starting to worry about litigation because the Delta variant is spreading? It's increasingly clear that this is overwhelmingly hitting unvaccinated people. I don't know what the explanation is, but let's take a look at a couple of clips. Here is an exchange on Fox and Friends. Brian Kilmeade continues to be a very strong vaccine hesitant voice, although he admits in this clip that he is vaccinated. That's a good thing. But here he and Steve Ducey sort of start mixing it up about vaccination and the possibility that masks are coming back on.
But listen, if you didn't get a vaccination, that's your choice. And if you did, like I did and they did.
So that's good. It's good that he's saying he got it. It's good that he's saying he got it, even if he has all the ifs, ands, and buts.
And maybe you did, then you should not wear a mask. And if you didn't, if you want to go cliff diving this weekend, you don't have to check with me. It seems a little dangerous, but I'm not going to judge you. And if you go ahead and put yourself in danger, if you feel as though this is not something for you, don't do it. But don't affect my life.
99% of the people who are dying from COVID are unvaccinated.
That's a fantastic statistic to be putting out to this audience. And I am glad. Listen, when Steve Ducey is the voice of reason, you know that everybody around you is making no sense.
It's their choice.
They don't want to die. So they are. The administration and the government is saying we need the mask mandate to protect the unvaccinated.
That's not their job. It's not their job to protect anybody.
So that is absolutely fascinating for a couple of different reasons. First of all, Brian Kilmeade insists, well, Steve, if it's mostly the unvaccinated getting sick and dying, that's their choice. And then Steve Ducey says, well, they don't want to die. Steve Ducey has hit on something that's really important. to some degree, and I know some in the audience don't like this perspective, to some degree, the anti-vax people, a lot of these anti-vax Republicans, are just victims of disinformation. And Steve Ducey is right. They don't want to die. It's not that they want to be martyred, making some kind of weird political statement by not getting vaccinated and then dying. But the real whopper here is when Kilmeade says it's not the government's job to protect anybody. Even small government conservatives, so-called, concede that they don't want the government involved in almost anything. But where they do want the government involved is to protect people. Now, stereotypically, what they mean by that is from foreign threats, from foreign militaries, from bombs, from terrorists. But a pandemic is a global and a domestic threat. It's not a foreign army. It's a virus. Apparently, in Brian Kilmeade's mind, that doesn't count, or that's a different story. But they are, by encouraging vaccination, the Biden administration is providing for the common defense of the country, of Americans. It would be, is Kilmeade okay with the FDA and food inspection? Or is it, listen, it's people's choice to just, hey, that chicken might be bad. The romaine or the spinach, it might have who knows what. We don't need FDA. It's basically people need to figure out their risk tolerance. No, that's ridiculous. And I've not heard him come out against that, although maybe he would. I don't know. And lastly, although it's mostly the unvaccinated, it's not only the unvaccinated. There are people who are vaccinated and will still get sick. And there are people who can't get vaccinated because of medical conditions. So the willingly unvaccinated, yes, they mostly put themselves at risk, but they're also putting at risk other people, immunocompromised and others. Also, complete blindness to their own network's role in fomenting this stuff. I mean, have they seen Tucker's show? Have they seen Laura Ingram's show, etc.? That's part of the reason that this is going on. But again, here's another example. Here's another daytime Fox clip from yesterday where they seem to be very clearly telling their audience, go and get vaccinated.
Mean to them, they're going to feel like they're being punished. The unvaccinated should be wearing masks in close quarters, but that could also be something that's recommended rather than mandated.
Doc, one last.
This is a propaganda doctor who met with Trump to go over Trump's cognition, right? I mean, this is a full-blown Fox News propagandist, but even he's saying this stuff, and I'm glad he is.
Quick question for you. With this Delta variant spreading across the country, and we see it's affecting the stock markets right now, how important is it for people to get vaccinated, and where can they get more information on where to get a shot?
It's very important that people get vaccinated because 2 shots of Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine is still giving you almost 90% protection against this and 95 to 100% protection against hospitalization. Hugely important. You can get your vaccine from a local pharmacy. Your physician can tell you where to get it. They're really all over the place. Very easy to get a vaccine right now. The public health centers all have it. There are vaccine centers still going. We're having a low compliance rate. The Delta variant needs to be a wake-up call to get vaccinated.
So this is really, really good that they are doing that. Now, why are they doing it? Could be fear of a lawsuit. You heard him say, oh, the stock market was down. I don't know why I have this vision of, I don't even want to stereotype. Someone who doesn't own any stocks and hasn't wanted the vaccine hearing, whoa, wait a second. The stock market's declining because of uncertainty. Now I'm going to go and get vaccinated. As funny as that would be, I don't care what it takes to get these people vaccinated. And if it's the stock market going down, whether or not it affects them, whether or not they own a single fraction of a share, or whether it's a Fox News doctor that Trump likes saying, go and get whatever it takes. It's good that a little bit during the day yesterday, the tide seemed to be turning a little bit on Fox News. So that's a good thing. We are very close to the 16th anniversary of the David Pakman Show. I know it's hard to believe. How could I have started a show when I was only 5 years old? It's shocking to you. It's shocking to my parents. It's shocking to everybody. But alas, we are almost at our 16th anniversary. And in honor of that, to celebrate that, we will be doing a one-day membership special at joinpakman.com. How can you not miss out? Just get on my newsletter at davidpakman.com. And then Monday morning, August 16th, you'll get a beautiful, perfect email telling you exactly how to avail yourself of this membership discount. I've been on Fox News a couple of times. If I'm ever invited back, Ground News is one of the first things I would use to get my head in the game and prepare myself for the interview, because Ground News is a news source comparison platform that lets you compare how outlets from the left, right, and center are reporting on a story. It makes it easy to see the nuances of how sources with differing political biases are covering a story. And it also shows you your news blind spots, stories that your side of the political spectrum may not have covered. Ground news can help you build a well-crafted argument for debating people you disagree with, or ground news can help you discover something new about your own perspective, challenging your own strongly held views on political issues. Be the most informed person in the room. Download the free Ground News app today by going to ground.news/Pacman. All right, let's continue today. I'm not even going to waste time telling you how important it is to become a member at joinpacman.com, because we just have too much going on, and it wouldn't be respectful to people to derail the show with such irrelevant, innocuous announcements. So we won't do that. A little more vaccine discussion. This is also just a very interesting exchange, and I don't exactly know the full way I would describe it, but over the last 24 to 36 hours, there's just been a little bit of a different dynamic about the tone of how a lot of this vaccination problem that the United States has is being discussed. I think most of it is pretty productive. Here's an example that is not very productive. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki yesterday held a press briefing. And during this press briefing, she was initially asked by Fox reporter Peter Dossier, and then another reporter sort of followed up about it. And the gist of the question was, shouldn't Joe Biden go and ask Donald Trump for help so that Trump will come out and tell his followers that they should go and get vaccinated? And of course, if you watched yesterday's program, you might be thinking, wait, Trump just basically put out an anti-vaccine statement. Now you want Trump to go and ask people to get vaccinated. And the truth is, Trump may actually do it, because everything Trump is doing is merely to hurt Joe Biden. And if the imagery suited Trump of Biden going to him and saying, Mr. Former President, I need your help. I need you to put out a statement so that your followers will get vaccinated, Trump would probably do it. He would drop the anti-vax stuff right away, as long as he gets credit for it. So let's jump into this. Here's Peter Dossier asking Jen Psaki, maybe Joe Biden should be reaching out to Donald Trump. Let's take a listen.
On vaccine hesitancy, as COVID-19
And by the way, no one can silence their phones in this room. You've got to be kidding me.
cases rise, if this is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated and you guys are having a hard time getting a certain part of the population to go get the shot.
Right. Now, what he doesn't say is part of the reason you're having trouble is because of Trump and other Republicans telling people this administration's not trustworthy. That's part of why you're having trouble. He doesn't mention you're sort of having trouble because of Trump.
President Biden ever call former President Trump and say, I need your help, let's cut a PSA and tell people to go do it?
Trump would love that, wouldn't he?
Well, first I would say that what we've seen in our data is that the most trusted voices are local officials, doctors, medical experts, civic leaders, clergy from time to time.
This is really important, because when you ask people, who do you trust the most on these types of things, people aren't saying any elected official. Now, there are some hardcore Trumpists who are just listening to Trump. So that's absolutely a fact.
And that is where we've really invested our funding and our resources. We've seen almost every former president play a role in putting out a PSA, making sure people understood in the country that the vaccine is safe and effective. We don't believe that requires an embroidered invitation to be a part of. But certainly any role of anyone who has a platform where they can provide information to the public that the vaccine is safe, it is effective. We don't see this as a political issue. We'd certainly welcome that engagement.
Right. Now, the thing is, because of Trump's narcissism, he has to be invited. That's the thing. Trump wants Biden to come begging. And of course, Donald Trump is the one reinforcing the talking point that people aren't getting vaccinated because they don't trust the Biden administration. We looked at that statement yesterday, and I'll put part of it up on the screen. Trump said, Joe Biden kept talking about how good of a job he's doing on the distribution of the vaccine that was developed by Operation Warp Speed, or quite simply, the Trump administration. He's not doing well at all. He's way behind schedule, a far more aggressive schedule than Trump ever put together. And people are refusing to take the vaccine because they don't trust his administration. So first of all, Trump's reinforcing the talking point that is preventing some people from going and getting vaccinated and saying, you really can't trust Biden. It's socialist, it's communist, and people don't trust the administration. Second, again, Biden doesn't have to ask Trump. Obama, Bush, and Clinton did it on their own. Why does Donald Trump have to be asked by Joe Biden to do this? And the answer is because he's a narcissist. And now he's holding this over Joe Biden's head, or attempting to, and working against Joe Biden up until such time until Joe Biden comes and says, pretty please, sir, will you go and do a video? And the most remarkable thing about this is Trump doesn't care about his followers. Understand that. If it's useful for Trump politically as he perceives it to encourage people not to get the vaccine, he'll do the sort of anti-vax, you can't really trust this administration talking points. If it makes Trump look good to have Biden come groveling to him, please do a video so your people will get vaccinated, then Trump will do it. One outcome leads to death. One outcome leads to vaccination, and mostly not death. Trump doesn't care. He's indifferent between the two. It's whatever makes him look politically the strongest. That's all the guy cares about. Now, here was where it got a little weird. The next reporter also followed up. Why isn't the Biden administration doing enough here when it comes to giving Trump credit for the vaccines?
Thanks, Jen. I have a follow-up to Peter's question about Trump, and I have my own vaccine question. In my follow-up, even if the administration doesn't partner with the former president, would it consider highlighting or acknowledging in a greater way his role in creating the vaccines to assure the rural voters who still support President Trump but are hesitant to get the vaccine?
Well, I think do you have data to suggest that that's the issue that's preventing people from getting vaccinated?
So that's a great question. On the one hand, I've said before, maybe you got to call this thing Trump juice and market it like a popular soda to these people. Maybe that'll make them get vaccinated. On the other hand, do we have reason to believe that they're waiting for Trump to say something? Because increasingly it seems they want to hear from local doctors and their local clergy for those that are religious.
Well, we're seeing that the communities that have the lowest vaccination rates did seem to vote for President Trump.
Okay, but what I'm asking you is if information related to whether or not the former president got credit is leading people not to get vaccinated.
Right.
Or is it information like microchips in vaccines and it causing fertility issues, causing health issues? Because you're drawing a few conclusions there that I haven't seen in data, but maybe you have that information to provide.
No, but I think it's an issue. I mean, I think it's a common sense that these are people who've supported him. These are people who are hesitant to get vaccinated. I don't think it takes a lot to draw the conclusion.
Well, let me be very clear. Our objective is to ensure all Americans will get vaccinated. That would be, of course, we'd love that. Democrats, Republicans, independents. It's not a political issue to us. The virus does not look at people's party affiliation. We recognize that. The president's going to govern for all people. What I'm conveying to you is you're jumping to a few conclusions that I don't think data backs up in terms of what the impacts are.
I think that they both are making good points here in the sense that it's very clear that if Donald Trump just focused on saying people go and get vaccinated, listen, it's my vaccine after all, give me the glory by going and taking the Trump vaccine, it would have an impact. At the same time, the data doesn't suggest that it's what elected officials say that is having the greatest impact on whether they are or aren't going to get vaccinated. They say it's local doctors and clergy. We know, unfortunately, that while they may not be admitting it, disinformation that they're seeing on social media seems to also be playing a significant role. So I can see both sides of that. But if the point is Trump wants Biden to come begging him to help, that's just more about Trump's narcissism than anything else. I want to just briefly play for you a clip of what might be, and then I think we're going to be done with vaccine stuff for today. These may be one of the most ignorant and dangerous anti-vaccine comments that we've seen through this entire cycle. And it's the idea of a vaccine simply being an unnatural thing. It's an unnatural thing, and by definition, maybe it would be bad. This is a guy named Rob Schmidt, who's on Newsmax. Rob Schmidt made these comments not too long ago, about 5 days ago. I just missed it at the time. Listen to what he says about vaccination in this clip.
You know, I've one thing I've always thought, and maybe you can guide me on this because obviously I'm not a doctor, but when I've always thought.
Glad to clarify that.
About vaccines, and I always think about just nature and the way everything works. And I feel like a vaccination in a weird way is just generally kind of going against nature. Like, I mean, if there is some disease out there, maybe there's just an ebb and flow to life where something's supposed to wipe out a certain amount of people, and that's just kind of the way evolution goes. Vaccines kind of stand in the way of that.
This is so painfully stupid. I mean, it's painfully stupid in a number of different ways. First of all, what does it mean to be for or against nature? I mean, vaccines are made in the natural world. They don't exist spontaneously. And often when people make arguments about nature, sometimes they're just wrong about what exists spontaneously in the natural world. They sort of say, well, it's created by society. A good example of that is one of the big anti-gay arguments for a while was it's not natural. Homosexuality is not natural because it doesn't lead to reproduction. You can't, a gay couple or a lesbian couple can't only by virtue of their genitalia and reproductive systems create offspring. But then you look at the natural world and you see, oh, there's hundreds or even thousands of species in which homosexuality has been identified. So what does it really mean to say it's unnatural? And so we kind of realize that they'll just use the word if they think it favors their argument. Now, here he sort of means to say something else, which is vaccination doesn't exist in nature spontaneously. If you understand about poison, you would know that a really long time ago, I don't know if it's 800 years ago, 1,000 or more, people started to figure out you could start to get, maybe not quite 800, I don't want to misspeak, maybe it was more like 500 years ago, you could start ingesting very small amounts of poison that would be deadly in larger quantities to develop an immunity. Is that unnatural by the way Rob Schmidt is talking about it? Because you're taking the poison, which exists, and just using a little bit of it and a little bit more to build up a tolerance. So anyway, it's a meaningless point. Let's listen to a little bit more of it.
Do you follow what I'm saying? Does that make sense to somebody in medicine?
Well, there are some reports that support what you're saying. There's one by Neeson and colleagues from Boston and the Mayo Clinic that shows among vaccinated populations, the diversity of different strains is narrowing. So it's going to be fewer numbers of strains. Right now in the United States, we're about 40% UK variant or the Alpha variant, and we're about 30% now Delta, which is the Indian variant. They get progressively weaker, but the diversity is changing with vaccination. And I think probably the best way to think about it is vaccines really ought to be targeted to protect the highest risk individuals.
Okay, anyway, so this guy is sort of playing a little bit coy with some of this stuff. But the point here is when you say it's not natural, is correction of myopia via contact lenses or glasses natural in the sense that do contact lenses exist in the real world? Is surgery that extends life for conditions that would have in many previous times killed people, is that natural? Is the idea that because something doesn't spontaneously exist without human intervention, it would somehow be bad is a painfully dumb idea. And unfortunately, the audience that's watching this stuff is exactly the type of audience that would be likely to fall for it. So just horrifying stuff on Newsmax and an argument that's not really an argument one way or the other. We're going to have more examples of stuff like this on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. And when you're there, you can follow me on Instagram as well at david.pakman, or both, or neither, whatever is your pleasure. We'll take a quick break and be back right after this. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's great to welcome to the program today Barry Meier, who is the former Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter and author of the book Spooked: The Secret Rise of Private Spies. Barry, it's so great to have you on today.
Thanks, David. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
So to start with, when we talk about private spies, we're not talking about a private investigator because you suspect your spouse might be cheating on you. We're really talking here about high-level intelligence work that often relates to foreign policy, domestic policy, etc. Give us like an overview of this industry and kind of how it developed.
Sure. It really got its start back in the late 1970s with a gentleman by the name of Jules Kroll, who created a company called Kroll Associates. And at that time, the public image of the private investigator was, as you mentioned, the guy in a raincoat who like hangs around motels trying to catch cheating spouses. Kroll realized that there was a huge marketplace for investigative services, particularly from corporations, because this was a period of time where there were a lot of corporate takeovers and shareholder battles. So he formed what was essentially the investigative equivalent of a law firm. These guys dressed well, they looked good. He hired not only ex-FBI agents and former prosecutors, but really smart college graduates who were interested in investigations. And thus began this industry that describes itself as, corporate investigators or corporate intelligence. But basically, they are skilled investigators who are hired by law firms, Hollywood moguls, political parties, you name it, to go out and dig up information and often dirt on their clients' adversaries.
And this can include, I'm reading Lawrence Wright's Going Clear right now. The Church of Scientology employs individuals like this regularly. We could talk about the so-called Trump dossier and whether that would fit the bill as the type of product that would kind of be produced by this. What are some of the maybe less obvious functions of such private spies?
Yeah, so it could be anything from, what we think of as legitimate use of investigators, finding missing people. It could be digging up material for lawsuits, locating witnesses for lawsuits. But the range is huge. As you mentioned, groups like Scientology, which are under public scrutiny, will hire investigators to dig up information or even try to intimidate their adversaries or critics. When I was first working for back when I was working for the Times investigating Purdue Pharma, they hired Kroll to investigate people who were suing the company, and also looked at me not long ago when Patrick Radin Keith was writing his book about the Sacklers. He found investigators sitting outside his house. Then you had cases where Hollywood has, made use of private investigators all the time to intimidate people. There was a famous case of Anthony Pellicano, who broke into the car of a Los Angeles Times reporter who was looking into him. So, the gamut is huge. What kind of unites this industry, I would say, is the willingness of these individuals, these investigators, private spies, whatever you want to call them, to use any means necessary to gather information about their targets.
So that gets me to maybe, when we'll talk about in a moment, maybe some ways in which there's sort of a upside here to private spies. But it seems one of the concerns would be there might be things corporations want done or governments want done or whoever that they would be worried about being caught doing, and the private investigator provides at least plausible deniability. Is that in fact the case? Is that what's attractive?
Exactly. It's basically, private investigators have been described as the gloves that lawyers put on when they don't want to get their hands dirty. And so that's the concept here. They will undertake things that, lawyers will claim they never ordered and are shocked to learn when it comes out they in fact signed off on it. Perfect example being David Boies's firm. As you know, David Boies is probably one of the best known lawyers in the United States. He's most famous for the Gore-Bush recount, working for the Democratic Party in that case, also for bringing the litigation in the Supreme Court that led to the upholding of same-sex marriage. A good guy in the eyes of most people. In fact, his law firm signed off on a contract that called for this, this Israeli private spying firm, Black Cube, who uses kind of very despicable types of tactics to, one, spy on women who were bringing claims of sexual assault against Harvey Weinstein, and also spy on reporters for The New Yorker and The New York Times who were investigating Harvey Weinstein's sexual assault allegations.
Yeah, if people are interested in that, Ronan Farrow's recent book, the title of the book escapes me, but it's by Ronan Farrow, and it's about the Harvey Weinstein story. outlines
exactly.
that quite a bit.
It's called Catch and Kill.
Catch and Kill, yes, exactly. Now, to sort of, I don't even know if this is playing devil's advocate, but to sort of see it from the other side, there are definitely circumstances we could imagine where the power of a government, the American government, for example, could be brought down against someone for political reasons or for reasons that you, me, or anybody might say are not on the up and up. Is there a case to be made that the ability to hire a so-called private spy to try to match, at least in some small way, the government's ability to bring political charges and use their investigative power against an individual or a corporation could be a good thing? I mean, I'm thinking out loud here.
Yes, I mean, let me give you a perfect example, because there's a lawsuit playing out right now. And the parties to the lawsuit, neither of them are particularly attractive. They're not good guys in common parlance. But through just a bizarre set of circumstances, the defendant in the case became aware that his emails had been hacked, and that his emails had been hacked and dumped on the internet, on this sort of obscure law website where lawyers for his adversary suddenly discovered them and then used them in litigation against him.
Right.
Well, after this case was decided, it was subsequently uncovered by a group of internet activists what the likely source of the hacked material was, who had done the hacking. And this individual then went out and retained his own private investigator to dig into this, and is now constructing a case to expose the hacking that went on against him. And so, there are many situations where the use of a private investigator, private spy, to defend yourself, to go and uncover wrongdoing that has been taken place against you, be it by a government or by an individual actor, private actor, is more than justified.
If we want to think about the way that journalists, as well as the media and consumers of media, should think about information that comes from private spies. I mean, there's sort of protocol for how do you handle a politician when you're talking to them for a story you might be writing? How do you deal with an anonymous source? How do you deal with a sort of civilian, non-public person in order to provide them certain protections? In terms of both the individuals and the information that comes from them, how should journalists, reporters, and interviewers be thinking about what comes from private spies?
Well, I think this is a real motivation for me when I wrote the book. And there was a certain epiphany for me when I wrote the book, because I deal a lot with the Steele dossier, the opposition research that was done against Donald Steele by this private investigative firm that hired an ex-MI6 agent
against Donald Trump.
Steele.
Just to be clear, just so the audience,
Yes.
You said Donald Steele. You meant Donald Trump, I assume.
Donald Trump, right? And Christopher Steele, this ex-MI6 agent, was hired to basically gather dirt on Donald Trump in Russia. Now, when this was being shopped to media organizations, it was implicit when it was being shown around by an investigative firm in D.C. that was in fact formed by two former Wall Street Journal reporters, that they couldn't identify the involvement of this firm, Fusion GPS, or Christopher Steele in the gathering of this information. It had to come from, appear out of the blue. It was like, immaculate conception. And when BuzzFeed published this information on the web, and it was embraced by particularly opponents of Donald Trump, and sort of became the focus of political and cultural and media conversation for 3 years. It didn't come out until late in the game that, in fact, this was a product of these private operatives who had put it together, and no one even knew what sources they were drawing upon. And so, the lesson I try to draw in the book, and the sort of issue that comes out in the book, is that, we as journalists, and I consider myself one, is that we really have to be more transparent with our audience, with our readers, our viewers, our listeners, about where this information is coming from. Why should we give people who are paid to gather what's effectively dirt and use our stories, our articles, our broadcasts as the means to disseminate that information to the public? Why should we treat them like whistleblowers? Why should we give them complete anonymity? Because it's not fair to the public. The public is being misled. And, this dance has gone on, this symbiotic relationship that has gone on between journalists and private spies for decades. But if there is one lesson we should take away from the whole, Steele Trump dossier incident, is that we really do need to be more transparent.
They need to be identified as sources, whereas the FBI might be a source for something about an investigation. We would identify where these
it's like coming from a government source, or, you need to, when people have a vested interest in getting out information, you don't have to say it's coming from Fusion GPS. You don't have to say, per se, it's coming from Christopher Steele, but you damn well sure saying that it was put together by individuals who had an axe to grind or were being paid to plant this information.
This was a paid research project by opponents of Donald Trump.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. By the Democratic National Committee. And the money was laundered through lawyers for the Democratic National Committee. And once journalists became aware that Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele were involved in it, then they had a duty to go a step further and to scrutinize those people, to scrutinize that firm, to scrutinize Christopher Steele, and say, what do we know about these people? Who have their clients been in the past? And how does that influence our assessment or analysis of how accurate the claims in the dossier are?
In the very limited time we have left, is your sense that the dossier is sort of a mixed bag, in the sense that, I'll just leave it there. Like, for example, I spoke to Michael Cohen last week, and he said the thing about him going to Prague, he's really never been to Prague. It wasn't like, he was in the airport, but he didn't clear customs. And so technically it was like, he doesn't know where that came from. But there were other things in there that either by coincidence or because they were better researched were true.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the Russian government tried to influence the 2016 election. There is no doubt that Donald Trump and his allies, his son, embraced efforts by Russia to influence the election. I mean, Russia, are you listening, right? I mean, wasn't that his big campaign rap? So, yeah, I mean, there was that. Russia was trying to influence. But that wasn't that finding or that assertion was not unique to the Steele dossier. It wasn't. He was not the only person that became aware of that. What is troubling is that the specific allegations in the Steele dossier, one, that Michael Cohen went to Prague, when in fact, if Michael Cohen had lied, Michael Cohen lied about a lot of things, and he got rung up for lying.
Yeah.
But he would have gotten rung up for lying about that, and he didn't. So he wasn't in Prague for that meeting. That Carter Page, another Trump ally, was offered this huge stake in a Russian energy company. No evidence that occurred. And the most infamous of all, P-tape, which has yet to emerge. So there is a lot there's a lot in the dossier which either has not proven to be true or been proven not to be true.
We've been speaking with Barry Meier, author of the book Spooked: The Secret Rise of Private Spies. Barry, such a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate your time.
And thank you, David. I really appreciate your having me on today.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. So we continue to try to sort out what 2022 and 2024 are going to look like politically. What's the country going to look like culturally? What's going to be the situation with the pandemic? What will be the situation with climate change? And one of the questions that remains is Donald Trump going to be a candidate in 2024? Because as of this point in time, the nomination seems his for the taking. He owns the Republican Party. Lindsey Graham said it, and Cenk Uygur said it. I mean, there's really the guy owns the Republican Party. The voters can't seem to get away from the guy. During an interview 2 weeks ago, or one and a half, or maybe it was like 3 years ago. No, it was in the last couple of weeks. Trump told Maria Bartiromo that he, for campaign finance reasons, can't make any announcements right now, but he's decided and he thinks people will be really happy and that he's going to do very well. The first signal that maybe he would be running. At the same time, when I was on Michael Cohen's program the other day, Michael Cohen said, I don't think Trump is going to run. There is a new report, very interesting report from Rolling Stone, which says Trump is telling his dinner plans he's planning to run for president. It was originally reported as Trump is telling his friends. And then, of course, it's not really clear Donald Trump has friends or normal relationships anyway. But the report from Rolling Stone's Andy Kroll is that in conversations with at least 3 people, a top Republican source says Trump has said he wants another run at the White House. Brace yourself, Donald Trump plans to run again. At least that's what the former president is telling dinner buddies. Trump has told at least 3 people he's dined with in recent months that he plans to run in 24. A former senior official at the RNC tells Rolling Stone, quote, I have 3 friends who have had dinner with him in the last couple of months. All 3 reported that his current plans are to run for president in 2024. The former RNC official says now whether he does or not is a different issue. We've still got 3 years to go, but he's telling people that. The ex-RNC official says the first 2 dinners took place in late spring, but the third dinner happened in the last 2 weeks. The first 2 companions came away from their conversation convinced Trump was serious and running. The third said he left the dinner not 100% sure Trump wants to run, but he likes being in the conversation. He wants to freeze the field, and he wants his name out there. Spokeswoman for Trump did not respond to requests for comment about Trump's recent dinner conversations and whether he plans to run for president again. I think it's a completely legitimate thing to mention that just because Trump says he's going to run and just because Trump might really intend to run, he may not run. And I continue to say it's his health that may be a factor in that. It could be serious losses in 2022. It could be that he's talked out of it in some way. I could at the same time believe that Trump believes he's running and yet he won't run in the end. Couple more things from the article. A former Trump advisor who speaks with members of Trump's inner circle says he's been briefed on similar conversations that reflect the former president's current thinking. The ex-advisor says Trump started to give indications in private back in May that he was leaning towards running again, and that the more recent signs suggest he wants to run. The ex-advisor says, all the people I talk to who deal with him directly think as of now he is running. Now, why do we care about this, guys? Can't we move on? The fact that this guy, number one, is like a baby dictator and his supporters are still with him. Number two, he lost everything for Republicans. He lost them the House in 2018. He lost them the Senate in 2020. He lost them the White House in 2020. He plays coy with the vaccine, but gets it in secret, but then tells them in March and they don't get it. And it's not clear he's responsible for their deaths. And it's not clear they even know or care. And he still has the vast majority of the Republican electorate behind him. And at least from a public standpoint, the majority of the Republican officials behind him. Not only does it tell us how broken, depraved, and disgusting this Republican Party is and this electorate is, it tells us a lot about the fact that this guy could still be a major player, if not the presumptive nominee, if he chooses to run and if he's healthy enough to run in 2024. It's quite stunning. And, what was the mistake many of us, myself included, made in 2016? I overestimated the intelligence of the Republican primary electorate, number one. And number two, I overestimated the degree to which the non-wacky right-wingers would uniformly realize the danger of Trump. Because remember, overwhelmingly, when we say who's to blame for Trump winning in 2016? Well, yeah, the guy chose to run, sure. But we've got to blame the people who voted for him primarily. But remember those people who say they're on the left, who in 2016 were saying, Hillary and Trump, they're two sides of the same coin. What? That is also partially to blame. So the mistake I made in 2016 was I overestimated the intelligence of the Republican electorate never to make this guy their nominee. And I overestimated the urgency of the entire electorate in total so that we would have enough independents and left-wingers and Democrats and progressives and whoever else to say, no, there's nothing similar about these two other than they're both members of Homo sapiens. We've got to get out there and vote for Hillary Clinton. And that's why it's so dangerous now. And that's why the fact that he still owns this party is so scary. And why the fact that, at least based on these reports, he plans to run is something that should horrify us all. We're continuing to learn more from this forthcoming book by Carol Leonnig and Philip Rucker from the Washington Post. And it seems like it's almost every day we get something new from this book. But the latest one is based on excerpts that now point out that Donald Trump talked to Carol Leonnig and Philip Rucker. So this is actually super, super interesting. Trump granted the authors of this new book an hours-long interview. The book is called I Alone Can Fix It. Now, you might be wondering, why exactly would he do that? And they actually talk about this in this Vanity Fair piece where they point out Donald Trump previously turned down speaking to them for a prior book. This time, he wanted to talk to them. And they actually say Trump had invited us to Mar-a-Lago. Let me make sure we have this on screen. Trump had invited us to Mar-a-Lago to interview him for this book. He had declined an interview for our first book about his presidency. And when A Very Stable Genius was published in January of 2020, attacked us personally and branded our reporting a work of fiction. But Trump was quick to agree to our request this time. He sought to curate history. Listen to this. As we sat for the interview, the former president's press secretary presented us with copies of a bound volume, 1,000 Accomplishments of President Donald J. Trump, Highlights of the First Term. On the back cover is the American flag, the presidential seal, and Trump's thick, jagged signature. The book totals 92 pages and is organized with chapters dedicated to the economy, tax cuts, deregulation, trade, and so on. Trump walked into the room flanked by plainclothes Secret Service, a much smaller detail than he once had. He wore his dark suit and tie, his bronze makeup, whatever. Okay, here's the relevant section that I want to show you, which goes to Trump's latest, his biggest regret. This is absolutely fascinating and very, very scary. Over the years, Trump rarely has expressed misgivings, but he regrets his response to protests last summer in Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, and other cities. Now, you might hear that and say, oh, maybe he regrets threatening to send in military. Maybe he regrets the despicable things he said about protesters or defending the police brutality. No. I think if I had to do it again, I would have brought in the military immediately, he said. What? If he had another opportunity, he would have more quickly scaled up the violence and the repression of the protesters by the military. Remember when he was thinking about this, that I and others said, okay, so hold on a second. You have protests triggered by excessive use of force by law enforcement against George Floyd. That was the catalyst for these protests. Trump's natural instinct is to send in military to shut down the protests, which were overwhelmingly peaceful. That is truly the tendency, the knee-jerk reaction of an authoritarian. It's a horrible thing. Now, ultimately, it didn't end up going down that way, and that's a very good thing. And having a chance to do it over again, Trump says, I wish I had sent in the military more quickly. They go on to say, Trump had no such second thoughts about his handling of the pandemic. He said he had been very tough in protecting the country by restricting travel, first from China, then Europe. He said he did so against the wishes of his top medical advisors. In fact, most of them agreed with the restrictions before he made the decision. That's true, according to participants in the discussions and their contemporaneous notes. But he correctly said he pushed scientists at the FDA at a level that they have never been pushed before to get vaccines approved in record time. Trump may have been pushing people, but there is no reason to believe, based on everything we know, that Trump had anything to do with these vaccines being approved any quicker than they would have been without him. This is just a delusion. One last bit of flavor. Quote, I think we did a great job on COVID, and it hasn't been recognized, Trump said, noting other countries saw spikes in COVID infections in the months after he left office. The cupboards were bare. We didn't have gowns. We didn't have masks. We didn't have ventilators. We didn't have anything. We brought in plane loads. We did a great job. When we asked Trump why he encouraged people to believe things that weren't true or to distrust science and the media, he delighted in talking about the scientific smarts in his family's genes. Can you imagine? First of all, I'm a big person. Do you know this? My uncle, Dr. John Trump, I think he was at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology longer than any other professor. Totally brilliant man. He had numerous degrees. So that's in the genes. I always go with that stuff, but it's a little bit in the genes. And Dr. John Trump, he was a great guy. No, I'm a big believer in science. If I wasn't, you wouldn't have a vaccine. It depends. Are you talking about disinformation or are you talking about lies? There's a more beautiful word called disinformation. So Trump seems to be saying he didn't lie, but he did spread disinformation, which I don't know that it actually makes it any better. Horrifying and delusional. And what's very interesting is, as they point out, Trump never apologizes for anything. Trump doesn't have regrets. Never. Here you finally get him to, I guess, reflect and say, there is something I wish I would have done differently. I wish I would have sent in troops to repress protests about police brutality more quickly. Just absolutely horrifying and dystopian in absolutely every sense of the word. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This is a really funny voicemail. This is someone who is admonishing me. This caller says I had better start telling the truth about Trump's rally crowds. Take a listen.
Hey, David. I'm calling about your Monday show. I think you and other journalists are doing a disservice to, I don't even know if it's democracy, by not showing the number of people who are showing up to these Trump hate rallies.
Right. But now listen to the turnaround here. It's not what you expect.
It was clear from Monday's show that when the people were being interviewed in the hallway, in the greeting hallway of Trump's CPAC rally, there just weren't that many people around. But what was really obvious was when you were panning the audience of his rally, and the front row seats were clearly not filled. Plus, the venue that he was speaking at, it didn't look like a big venue. It looked like a venue, like a small movie theater in suburbia or something like that. Anyway, I look forward to watching your show every day, but I do think that should be rectified.
You were completely right. You were completely right. I did not point out that, Trump claimed there were 1 million people at his rally on January 6th. There were not. Trump claimed there were 30,000 people at the rally I covered. I believe it was on June 26th, or maybe it was the July 3rd rally. And it is absolutely true that his crowds have just been weak. But I want to restate this. The fact that people aren't right now energized to go out and see Trump speak in public means nothing about the fact that this guy still owns and controls and is the primary individual in the Republican Party. Let's not forget that, because if we just fall for the small crowd stuff, that's how Trump ends up winning again. And I would say none of us, some people in the audience do want that. for the most part, most of my audience recognizes that for the house of horrors that it would be. We have a great bonus show for you today. It's a great one. I'm out of time, but just sign up at joinpacman.com and it'll be a surprise. But it's a fantastic bonus show we have planned for you. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Ground News is combating divisiveness in media. Ground is a news comparison platform that helps you see multiple perspectives for any news story so you can be more of a well-rounded news reader. Download the free app at ground.news/Pacman.